Welcome back, everyone,
Thank you.
to another episode of Dan Moses. It's great to have you back.
Man, the pleasure is mine. Actually, I'm here today simply because you've motivated me to just become one of the many voices to continue talking about these things, and the change that we're looking for, whether it's in ourselves or environmentally, is not going to happen unless we talk about it.
Yes, it's not, and that's the whole thing, is there's no limitation on the conversation, but the conversation needs to be simplified and crystallized for people to recognize that the issues that we're dealing with are obvious, they're self-evident. People are trying to cover it up. They're trying to pretend that you're not allowed to be dissatisfied with the clear issues that are societal and part of the environment at this point. The things that interfere with our own existence and our own freedom under our Lord and Creator, God. And there are false gods, there are false religions, there are false prophets, there are sinful people who are glorifying their sin, and it's got to stop. It's got to stop. And so I'm glad that you're going to begin talking about it.
Something you said already triggered a thought in this regard. The fact that we're speaking aloud is kind of going against the current, because the current wave is to stop people from speaking, controlling what they say, labeling you as a victim and an enemy, or anything negative to make you shut your mouth. I think a good example of this actually is racism. You know, I run a boxing gym with young boys all the time, and they just repeat dumb things they hear on YouTube every 5 seconds, and they have already handpicked racially inappropriate things to say because they heard what not to say on the internet, right? And even beyond that, there's people who have a platform to make jokes about these things, and now kids say them, and then we all have to, shut our mouths and close our ears when, like, ultimately all of this stuff is extremely irrelevant. I'm an observant and religious Jew. You're going to talk to me about segregation and hatred from people because of your religious beliefs. Now people of culture and color have, of course, experienced very similar things, if not possibly worse things, over the course of the history of humanity. But we're going to have to accept that many people are different in order to kind of glorify each other and accept each other for who we are, not the opposite.
Yeah, well, you bring up racism. I find it fascinating that there is no racism in the Torah whatsoever. It's just a non-issue. There's a lot of sexism, though, because, the Torah is very clear about the different roles for men and women. That's something that's baked into nature itself. And that's another thing that you're not allowed to have an opinion on nowadays, the different roles of men and women, and the fact that those roles are very clearly defined. And the more that we deviate from that, the more women become masculinized and men become feminized, and the gap expands, and it's nearly impossible for men and women to come together nowadays. And even if they are together in either mock relationships or arranged marriages, are they truly together? Are they truly united? But not to mention the people that are just plain single. We've been dealing with that for years. And
yes, we have.
It's a wild thing that society could become so broken that the most basic function of men and women coming together in a real sense to build families together in life and in sanctity, it's just been lost. And that's something we need to recover. It's the first thing we need to recover. That's the first thing God tells the man and the woman: be fruitful and multiply. Then he tells the man, after he created the woman, leave your father and mother, cling to your woman, and become one flesh. He's clearly encouraging the union of the male and the female to the highest degree, and the result being fruits and offspring.
Well, then that means that there is a role. So if you remove the roles, which is the common way that male and female is taught, even to the degree that there is no male and female, and you're whatever you want to call yourself on a given moment, to everybody who's listening to this podcast, I don't think you should ever give that any credence ever. You're breeding mentally ill people, and you're going to have children being confused with things that they will never recover from. And actually, it's so bad that it'll get to the point where they're encouraged to become a walking wound. And at this point, those people are living in the world and they're suffering tremendously, and it's because of the terrible ideas that were put into their head. And I think all of us should do a kindness to them and just let them finally be acknowledged for what they are. They themselves are suffering. And when it comes back to tactically, like, what are the alternatives, right? You talked about, well, there's the male-female relationship and the union, and a woman, she nurtures and she takes care of the children in the house, and the man, he provides and he protects. If that doesn't exist, then what are we doing? Well, we have the hookup culture, right? We have promiscuous sexual relationships, because you see, if you remove God from the picture and you remove the roles from the picture, you just have human beings, right? And we're human beings even from the standpoint of God, right? God says there are moral sexual relationships and there are immoral sexual relationships. Interestingly enough, I think we've had enough conversations with people to see that there's clearly delusion there. Like, oh, a man can sleep with a man and homosexuality is cool. Or, yeah, I can have a girlfriend and a boyfriend. I can date this fridge, At the end of the day, it gets to the point where, okay, well, you just love who you want to love, right? Who am I to judge? It's like, well, why don't you love your mom? You don't think that doesn't exist? You don't think there's incestual people out there? And like, actually, the masses, by the way, let's go deeper. How about bestiality? You don't think people are doing weird shit with animals all day long? It's like, yeah, you better believe it when people start replacing children with animals, and then they start dressing them up and calling them their babies. I don't even want to know what's happening behind closed doors.
Yeah, I mean, sleeping in bed with their dogs, like, sorry, like, this shit's retarded.
If it only stopped there, like, I think animals are amazing creatures. It's not the point of the conversation.
Yeah, but there's clearly just be humans and animals, and let the animals be with their family and let the humans be with their families. But, the lines are being blurred, reminiscent of the time of Noah. All flesh had corrupted its way on earth, right? If we're not following the prescribed order that God set, we're going to devolve into corruption and perversion. And, we have this term, the 3 Ps, right? If you're not engaged with healthy sexual behavior, you'll find yourself either in prostitution, promiscuity, or pornography, which is the alternative to a healthy sexual relationship and commitment and the building of family. You have these degenerate sexual behaviors that you're going to end up in. Otherwise, you're going to be celibate, which is not really the greatest option either. I mean, it's either way, it's all the denial of life, and the gap between male and female only widens further.
Well, it's causing this, like, on an internet sensation level, like, men are essentially withholding themselves from women. First of all, I would say appropriately so, because ultimately, if women are just going to be on birth control and they're going to let random bums sleep with them and they're just going to go from guy to guy to guy, then that starts to affect the man too, because that's the sort of woman that he's around all the time. Now, men have their own problems and they need to get their act together. If maybe they had a woman that, if they had a sexual relationship or even just a healthy, intimate relationship, well, maybe she could get pregnant. Well, we'll remove that with the birth control pill. So you have some guy who just sleeps around and thinks this is pretty cool, and you know what? The woman talks shit to him or whatever, he's cool with it because he's just going to go home and suck his thumb. Like, you basically got like big babies. And by the way, they can't work at all. They're in school. Where are they going to go? They're going to go after they're done with all the years of adolescent school. You jump into high school where you learn nothing, and then you jump into college. And then after you get your bachelor's, you have to get your master's. I mean, we're talking about a 30-year-old individual who just incurred debt over the course of 30 years. We're not, teaching the new generation of kids to be smart, providing men and women. We're turning them into Uber drivers, like debt. I mean, the perfect slave, honestly, like, look, you have 100,000 of debt that you owe me, right? I'll give you a job where you can pay me and still somewhat get by. But what are you doing? You're like in a pod all day. So what is this, Wall-E again? Like, how many damn movies do we need to see to realize that, like, this is actually happening to our generation?
When I saw a woman driving a UPS truck, I knew we're screwed.
Well, we don't want to get into that. Look, at the end of the day, just for us to open our mouths like this, incur so much hate. But at the end of the day, let's talk about what is this like vision of change that we even have. I think that's something good to discuss. From my point of view, you have men and women following their roles. Now that incurs not only children, so life, right? But it also creates educated children because mothers are at home with them all the time, giving them the love and the nurture that they should be having that's stripped from them in the school systems, to having a relationship with his parents, which they'll only have one, kind of correlating maybe somewhat importantly to the fifth commandment and God commanding us and the 10 most integral commandments on earth, and having men working very hard in order to maintain their own safety, the safety of their wives, the safety of their children, and to educate them and to protect them. This life isn't light at all. There's a lot of really horrible things that you have to deal with, like broken friendships and broken trust and, debt and money and bills, right? Like it's so base level on like what we have to be focusing on. And if we're spreading ourselves thin, then we're compromising, right? Well, I can share the household expenses by passing it off to my wife, and we don't need to have children because she can just go on birth control. Is the whole frame of life just around how much money you can pump? Also, the reason we're inflated is because you have dumb people who are willing to accept this willing of life. Like, yeah, there's dumb people out there. We didn't end up here by mistake. We end up here because of the mistakes of our parents, and I think that needs to be acknowledged as well.
Yeah. And, I always think how the dumb and the evil feed off each other. All right. You have evil people dominating stupid people. They work perfectly in harmony. The stupid people let themselves be controlled by the evil agendas, and we're all done for. At the end of the day, people need to rise up to the occasion and take the accountability for their own lives and recognize that no one else is going to do it for them. And this endless waiting game and the desire for someone else to come and baby you, it's just encouraging eternal babies, adult babies, relying...
Malpractice, by the way. Ultimately, there is extremely negative consequences to promiscuous sex. And by the way, it happens, like it basically, even to myself, I would say to a degree, absolutely. Like I've lived in this life, I've been told, okay, you're religious and you have to do all of these crazy things that mankind has created, like, oh, don't wipe your eyes in the morning. We have a way for you to wipe your ass on the toilet, like things that God obviously didn't put in his Old Testament or in his testament to mankind. And then it gets to the point where you realize, okay, well, that's not true. So I guess there's a degree of things that I'm willing to accept and not accept. And that's if you even accept God upon you in the first place. It trickles down to, well, I want to live, and living is a great thing, and experiencing people and your humanity and all these wonderful things that exist, I constantly encourage people to do. But if you continue to push down that path, like, you're a 15, 16-year-old boy, and you have a relationship for the first time, and then you're dating this girl and you guys are both virgins, and then all of a sudden, well, maybe she gets pregnant, right? Like, well, if that were somehow on the table, like that kind of makes sense. Like, well, no, there's birth control there, and she can't get pregnant because she's got to go to college. And actually, she's in high school, but you guys are allowed to have sex though.
Yeah.
Right. And so it's just breeding degeneracy, and it's encouraging it. And it's saying, look, honey, it's cool. You're going to go from high school and you're going to go from boyfriend to boyfriend to boyfriend until you're in college. And by the way, for all the girls who just put that aside and say, hey, I'm so smart, I'm gonna make such a difference in the world, like, I'm gonna go out there and become the next Einstein. It's like, first of all, from the biblical standpoint, nobody cares, even from the man's position. Like, humanity is about making existence livable and increasing children.
Yeah, and blessing. And that's the whole thing. It's been lost. People are chasing these pipe dreams that have been placed on them. They're ascribing value to these dreams that actually have no real value. It's just they're following a societal system where they're told that this is success, but it's not success. It's actually failure, and it's devastating, and it's lonely, and it doesn't result in the blessings that come with the creation of life and existing in a prosperous frame, which is the one that God encourages, which is one that's based off of, living off the land, living with the crops and with your family and with your household and with your God. And that's the whole thing, is God has been lost from people's minds. And I think there's a beautiful verse in Deuteronomy where it says, we're going to be like living in a state of evils. And we'll say, why? Where's God? Is it because there's no God among us that all of these evils have found us? But God says, no, I have surely concealed my face because of all the evil that you have done. All right. And that's the whole point, is we're not able to see that it's our evil that has caused this. It's our denial of God that has caused him to conceal his face. And then we turn and point the finger at God. It's ridiculous.
God has only been kind and giving and loving to all of us since the start of existence. I think you're labeling it correctly. It's absolutely mankind who does this to themselves and causes this evil, even to the point of why we follow God's way. If God is the one telling you that you're evil since the days of your youth, that there has been a historical explanation of this, and then I'm giving it to you to have that understanding. And when you get into these very difficult scenarios, you're going to be able to reference my word. And that's the most relieving thing on earth, because whether or not we had that literature or not, we'd have to deal with those problems. And at the end of the day, whether you're, 6'3" and you're a business owner and you got all the money in the world, and maybe you're like there's this internet sensation guy, King Azulai. So he calls himself a king, right? And he actually says some pretty smart things every now and then. It's not like he's the most unpleasant guy, but he must be at least 35 years old. He's super jacked, done some, bodybuilding stuff. Maybe he's using, maybe he's not, who knows, right? Like, I don't really care. At the end of the day, he talks about the same issues that we're talking about now, but he doesn't have a woman. How does a guy who has all these things not have a wife? You're a king, but you don't have a queen. So it extends to him. It extends to us. It extends to all other young men who are constantly chasing this, like, you need to make money in order to be heard and in order to be a badass, in order to get the woman, in order to do that. It's like, no, like, nobody's getting a piece of anything real right now. The birth rate is extremely, extremely low. Women have stopped participating in mankind. Young girls who are no longer that young anymore have an insane body count that's irreparable. And we all have to live with these consequences. And so why they're going to stop partaking of it and try to heal one another and accept one another for who we are by actually really, really putting in some very hard work, by the way. It's not going to be easy. Or we're going to continue this, and it's going to get worse and worse and worse to the point that, well, not only do we continue living in this, but I think our freedoms are going to be taken from us. I don't think we're going to be living in abundance of food. I don't think we're going to be living in an abundance of even shelter, for that matter. It's going to be really bad.
Yeah, and that's the importance of acknowledging the dissatisfaction that exists within us, not to complain. That's one of the very bad characteristics of the Israelite people, being a stiff-necked nation, always complaining, right? When God is redeeming them, they're complaining. Complaining is different than acknowledging that something's wrong and praying to God and asking him for his help and taking the responsibility that you need to take in that moment to better your situation and improve yourself. That's what pushes you to make things better. Otherwise, if we're just going to be content with a situation that's clearly not sufficient, we're going to get nowhere.
Totally agree. And look, I commend you tremendously for not only teaching people the Torah, but by actually living by that standard yourself. You don't talk about your own life, and it may be necessary, like at the end of the day, we ourselves went out almost every single night just to go out in every environment. We wear our kippah and our tzitzit, and had many intense conversations over the course of many years. And you just start seeing that, like, oh wow, like, you're just going to continue to reward degeneracy, and you're going to continue to glorify like heathens and so really bad people. I just want to live, When does that actually take over? And it looks like not unless people are going to start living correctly. And that can only be correct if you're following the rules of God's Torah. Now, from the standpoint of us and what we know, right, we're observant Jews. We were given the Testament. We were told by God in order to minister the laws. And it's taken a good amount of studying, not too much studying. Ultimately, it's just the 5 books of Moses. But we've already hashed that out amongst ourselves. You look at the secular world and you look at where they go. Well, Christianity, right? Christianity, we're a Judeo-Christian value country, right? And that's what made us flourish so much. How did we get to the point where God has become out of the equation? We have God-given rights, yet God's not part of the picture. It's the same thing with the Jews. The land of Israel is ours because God said so in the Old Testament, but we don't follow the Old Testament. Well, then everybody's clowning. It couldn't be any more clear, in my opinion.
Yeah. I mean, I saw Benjamin Netanyahu, the prime minister of Israel, mock biblical values just to advance his own agenda. So he went ahead and quoted the Bible when it was convenient for him, saying like, the lions of Judah rise to defeat their enemies. And then he also went and said, haha, but if you're a gay and you try going to Gaza, see what they'll do for you. Gays for Gaza is like chickens for KFC. Ha 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 ha. A dumb Twitter meme mocking biblical values, saying that, yeah, as a Jewish nation, we don't actually care what God says. And that is what causes the destruction of Israel. That is what causes the downfall of the Jewish people again and again and again. That is their entire history. Read the Torah, even read the history in the Old Testament if you want to see why the Jewish people were exiled from their land in the first place.
Most definitely. Well, you look at the removal of values for young boys and young girls. You look at how they're living and how that's ruining their lives. We need to try and bring values back into this country, whether you're Jewish or you're Christian or you're Muslim. We can actually all be together and unified in this regard. Christians actually have the Old Testament attached to their New, and Jesus was a Jew. He was like your prophet who told you how to live correctly. If you remove the Old Testament from the New Testament, you actually have an entire country basing their values off of, because I said so, like, well, what do you say very much? Like, judge a fruit by its tree. It's like, yeah, it's good info. I like that. But tactically speaking, like, are you allowed to kill? Are you allowed to steal? Are you allowed to do this? He's like, well, the Old Testament says so. It's like, well, maybe you should listen to Christ, however the hell you refer to him. For me, in my opinion, and how it looks historically, he's a man, and he got killed by Jews and by Jews and Romans, and virtually everybody wanted to get rid of that guy, and so it's hard to place the blame at this point. Obviously, God's hand is in the equation by attaching his values to the whole world, and I see that as positive.
Yeah, I think the biggest problem is A, worshiping Jesus as God, and B, saying that the law is gone. The law is very much here. All of the laws in the Old Testament are eternal decrees that God has given to his people that we must uphold for eternity, right? The covenant that God made is eternal. God himself says that he will not nullify his covenant with the children of Israel. The fact that we have nullified the covenant means that we need to reestablish our age-old covenant with God, because God doesn't change his mind. God doesn't go back on his word. We're the ones who have fallen short, and we need to return to God in this respect. But to do away with the Old Testament is a gigantic failure.
It's to do away with morality. It's to do away with ethics. It's to do away with the foundation. That's where we are now. That's the world that I walk amongst, and I do my job. At the end of the day, I'm just a man. I'm a piece of flesh. We're all dust. We all die. So I have responsibilities. I need to show up. I can't lie. I can't be late on payments. I can't steal. I can't kill. I can't commit adultery. I can't just sleep around with anybody I want. God says there should not be a promiscuous man or a promiscuous woman. That actually, if a man were to take a woman, he'd be obligated to maintain her marital status. He'd be obligated to maintain her food and her clothing. And it's not easy to get rid of her either. It's like a pretty big deal. So women are treated with respect for who they are and what they are. Men get to live as themselves. Now you're being shamed just for being a man. Like, I can't just like snap my fingers and not be like 6'3" with a beard, like, why am I getting hated for this? Like, I was born this way, and also that's how all men are, like, oh, you're not handsome enough. You're a short king. You're this, you're that. Like, why would you be so rude? Who gave you the green light to just be a rude and disgusting person? But it's cool when you're a woman, but it's not cool when you're a man? Not cool at all. You know, people need to stand up and they need to fight these things on an encounter to an encounter basis till your voice is loud enough and the whole world is speaking like that. There's something that I myself am taking steps in the direction towards is, even though my speech is flawed and I don't always get the right ideas out there, and I'm an emotional human being just like the rest of us, and not all the time are the things said perfectly and correctly, but I'm on the side of life. And I encourage other people that even if it's not perfect, you should speak to, and you should start living that way without any fear, because if you live with God, you have nothing else to fear.
Amen.
Thank you for having me. God bless you.
Thank you.